Blake Lively is back in the headlines, and honestly, at this point, it feels like she just refuses to let this thing die. The Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni case was supposed to be over, like most people thought the settlement happened. Everyone went home, and we could all move on with our lives. But no, Blake is still pushing. And now the woman who literally wrote the law that Blake is trying to use, Victoria Burke, the architect of this legislation, has come out and said Blake is misusing it. When the person who created the law tells you that you're using it wrong, that's not a good sign. That's actually a really, really bad sign. So here's what's going on. Blake's team apparently reached out to Victoria Burke directly. They wanted to work together. They wanted Blake to be the face of taking this law national. Like Blake Lively wanted to go on a whole public tour, championing this legislation, positioning herself as some kind of advocate and hero for survivors. And the attorneys and legal commentators who have been watching this case closely are calling it exactly what it is: stolen glory. This is not Blake's fight. This is not Blake's story. She didn't build this. She didn't fight for this. And yet, here she is trying to attach her name to it like it was her idea all along. The law itself, and this part actually matters, was designed for a really specific purpose. Attorney's fees, clauses in statutes like this exist for one of two reasons: either to punish genuinely terrible conduct, which is why there's that malice language baked into the law, or to level the playing field for survivors who can't easily find lawyers to take their cases. Because here's the reality. Sexual harassment cases are hard to litigate. Lawyers take on a lot of risk. These fee provisions exist to make it a little more worthwhile to represent people who actually need the help. That's the whole point. That's the spirit of the law. And Blake Lively, a wealthy, extremely well-resourced Hollywood celebrity with a full legal team, using this provision to chase massive attorney's fees after a settlement. That's not what this was built for. Not even close. And the judge in this case, he's not hiding how he feels. During the recent hearing, he was raising very pointed, very direct questions that basically signal he's not interested in giving Blake what she's asking for. He asked what happens to the attorney's fees claim, given that Blake's sexual harassment case was already dismissed. She didn't win on that. It got thrown out on a 12b6 motion, which is early in the process, meaning the judge looked at it and said there wasn't enough there to even proceed. So now Blake wants treble damages, meaning she wants her attorney's fees tripled on a claim she lost. The judge is essentially asking her legal team, how does that work? What exactly am I supposed to treble here? And the bigger question he raised was whether the defendants are actually entitled to a jury trial on the damages issue, rather than just having the judge decide, because you can't just walk in and ask for enormous sums of money and expect a judge to rubber stamp it without any process. Blake's team doesn't have a clean answer to any of this, and the judge basically said as much by pointing out that Blake has the power to make this whole thing go away. He's not subtle about it. He's telling her, you can end this. Just walk away. But Blake isn't walking away. She's doubling down. And the legal experts watching this are frustrated in a way that's hard to overstate. What makes this especially interesting is the comparison being drawn to the Duke lacrosse case, because that's really where the constitutional tension in this law gets uncomfortable. In that case, Crystal Mangum accused 3 lacrosse players of rape, and it turned out the whole thing was fabricated. Those guys were charged criminally, their lives were turned upside down, and eventually the truth came out. Now imagine if she had sued them civilly too. Under the kind of law Blake is championing, if those 3 men had tried to file a defamation counterclaim, they could have been burdened by this malice standard, meaning they'd have to prove she acted with malice in making the false accusation. And one of the legal commentators put it really well. What other motive could there have been? If someone makes something up entirely, by definition, wasn't that malicious? Why should the burden be higher on the person who was falsely accused simply because the false accusation was about something serious like rape? That's a real constitutional question, and it's one that this judge in Blake's case may not even have to answer directly. But somewhere down the line, as Blake tries to push this law into other states, some judge is going to have to deal with it because the law as written can be weaponized. And the experts are saying Blake Lively is a textbook example of exactly that. The thing that keeps coming up in all the legal commentary is the settlement itself. Most people assumed when the settlement was announced that it was finished, complete, over, but apparently it wasn't drafted cleanly. There were no complete releases on all the issues, which means Blake can keep coming back to court over specific remaining claims like this attorney's fees fight, and the judge is not pleased about this because a settlement is supposed to settle things. That's the entire point. If you still have to go back to court repeatedly after a settlement, you didn't really get the benefit of settling, you just delayed the litigation. And what's wild is that Justin Baldoni's team could actually make a real argument here, because to get what she wants under this law, Blake has to prove that Baldoni brought his claims against her with malice. That is the standard. And some of the legal commentators watching this closely are saying Baldoni might actually be able to flip that and show that Blake's pursuit of this is the thing that looks malicious. Because when you look at the timeline, when you look at how Blake's PR team operated during the initial rollout of the It Ends With Us press tour, and when you look at how quickly Blake's legal team moved to file and go public, there's a pattern there that doesn't exactly suggest innocent victim quietly seeking justice. It screams strategy. And that's the part that keeps bothering people who have been following this from the beginning. Because the way this whole thing was handled publicly from Blake's side was never just about the legal case, it was about narrative control. The initial filing, the timing, the way it landed in the press, all of it felt coordinated. Like the goal wasn't just to win in court, the goal was to win in the court of public opinion first, and then use that momentum to pressure the legal outcome. And that's a legitimate concern that the judge is clearly aware of because he's not treating Blake's team with any kind of deference right now. He's asking hard questions and not accepting vague answers. Now here's where it gets even messier. Blake is apparently not just fighting this battle in New York. She wants this law spread nationally. She wants to be the person leading that charge. And the fact that her team reached out to Victoria Burke, the woman who actually created the legislation, to try to partner up, and Victoria Burke essentially said no, and then publicly called out the misuse. That tells you everything. Victoria Burke did not build this law so that wealthy celebrities could use it to inflate their legal fee recoveries after losing their core claims. She built it for survivors who don't have resources, who struggle to find representation, who need the legal system to work a little harder for them. Blake Lively is not that person. Blake Lively has never been that person in this case, and the treble damages ask tripling the attorney's fees is genuinely enormous. We don't have the exact number public. But when you're talking about high-powered New York litigation at this level, attorney's fees can run into the millions easily. Triple that, and you're talking about a figure that even the judge flagged as potentially excessive. There's actually a constitutional argument that excessive damages awards of this kind run into problems. You can't just impose wildly disproportionate financial penalties without running into due process issues. And the judge raised that too. He's covering every angle, and every angle he's raising is pointing toward the same conclusion. He doesn't want to give Blake what she's asking for, and he's trying to find the cleanest legal path to say no. What's also telling is the way the settlement was structured, or rather how it wasn't structured. Legal experts are pretty consistent on this. When you negotiate a settlement, the whole point is to close every open door. You draft comprehensive releases, you cover all claims, you make sure nobody can come back to court on any remaining issue. That's basic. That's Settlement 101. The fact that this settlement left open the attorney's fees question means either Blake's team deliberately kept it open because they always planned to pursue this next phase, or the drafting was careless. And given how calculated Blake's team has been throughout this entire case, careless drafting seems unlikely. This feels intentional. This feels like Blake's legal team settled the main case while preserving the ability to come back and chase this fees award, knowing that the fees claim under this statute could be worth more than anything she might have recovered at trial. And that's actually a really important point that doesn't get enough attention. Blake didn't win at trial. There was no trial. Her sexual harassment claim was dismissed before it ever got there. So, she didn't get a jury verdict. She didn't get a damages award. She didn't get vindication in the courtroom in any traditional sense. What she got was a settlement, the terms of which we don't fully know, and now she's trying to use the statute to get a massive payout on top of that settlement, on top of a claim she lost using a law designed to help people who don't have her advantages. It's a lot. It's really a lot. The Duke lacrosse parallel keeps coming up because it's genuinely useful for understanding why this law is complicated. Those 3 men had their lives destroyed by a false accusation, and the argument is, why should they have had to prove malice to bring a defamation counterclaim? Why should the bar be higher for them simply because the false accusation was sexual in nature? That feels backwards. And it's the same tension that exists in Blake's case, just from a different angle. Baldoni is essentially being told that because Blake's original claim was about sexual harassment, the standard for him to push back legally is elevated. And the constitutional question of whether that's fair is one that courts are going to have to wrestle with seriously as this law tries to expand beyond New York. Because here's the thing, if this law goes national the way Blake wants, and if Blake becomes the face of it, you're going to see more cases that look exactly like this one. Wealthy, well-resourced parties using a survivor-focused statute to gain litigation advantages that have nothing to do with the protection the law was meant to offer. And the people who actually need that protection, the people Victoria Burke wrote the law for, are the ones who lose when that happens. Because once a law gets a reputation for being weaponized, it becomes harder to enforce it in the cases where it genuinely matters. The judge in this case has been pretty transparent about where his head is at. He didn't mince words when he told Blake's attorneys that their client has the power to end this. That's a judge essentially saying, I'm not your ally here, and I'm not going to do your client's work for her. He's raising jury trial questions. He's raising constitutional questions. He's raising practical questions about how damages would even be calculated without a trial on the merits. And every single one of those questions is a door he's opening to walk this case out of his courtroom without giving Blake the payday she's clearly angling for. And honestly, at this point, even people who were sympathetic to Blake early on are growing tired because there's a version of this story where Blake Lively had legitimate grievances. Maybe things on that set were uncomfortable. Maybe the press tour dynamic was genuinely difficult. But the way this has been handled legally and publicly has undermined whatever genuine sympathy she might have had. Because instead of taking a settlement and stepping back, Blake is out here trying to rebrand herself as a legal advocate, trying to take ownership of legislation she had nothing to do with building and asking a judge to hand her a massive financial award on a claim she didn't win. That's not the behavior of someone who just wanted justice and accountability. That's the behavior of someone who wants to win loudly, publicly, and profitably. Justin Baldoni is not a perfect figure in this story either. Nobody's walking away from this looking entirely clean, but the legal question right now is pretty specific. Did Baldoni bring his claims against Blake with malice? And when you look at what malice actually means in a legal context, it means he knew his claims were false or acted with reckless disregard for whether they were true or false. That's a high bar. And given everything that's been documented about what happened between these two camps, Baldoni's team has a reasonable argument that his claims had legitimate basis, which means Blake's path to getting treble damages under the statute is genuinely narrow. The judge seems to see that. Most legal observers seem to see that. Blake's team seems to be the only group that thinks this is a winning move. There's also the question of what happens to Blake's reputation long-term through all of this, because public opinion on her has shifted pretty dramatically over the course of this case. She came out of the gate with a lot of public support. The initial filing, the allegations about the PR campaign Baldoni allegedly ran against her. People were angry on her behalf, but the more this has dragged on, the more the sympathy has faded. And the move to try to attach herself to Victoria Burke's legislation and become the national face of this law that backfired badly because Victoria Burke herself pushed back. And when the person you're trying to use as your credibility shield publicly distances themselves from you, you don't get to pretend that didn't happen. What's left now is essentially a judge who wants his case resolved, a law that's being stress-tested in ways its creator never intended, a settlement that wasn't clean enough to actually settle anything. And Blake Lively is still pushing forward when everyone around her, including people in her own legal world, seems to be quietly suggesting she should stop. The legal commentators are done being polite about it at this point. They're calling it a fake victory tour. They're saying she's using this for publicity. They're saying she's trying to turn a loss into a win through sheer financial pressure and media noise. And the judge is not playing along. Here's where this likely ends. The judge is going to find a way to either deny the treble damages request outright, send the question to a jury where Blake's chances get even harder, or move some portion of it to a different court. He is not going to hand Blake Lively a massive attorney's fees award on a dismissed claim. That's just not where this is heading based on everything that came out of that hearing. Blake is going to walk away from this with whatever she got in the settlement, and that's probably going to be it. No national advocacy platform, no tripled fees, no victory lap, and maybe hopefully that's the moment where this whole thing finally ends. Because the people who are genuinely hurt by what this case has done to the legislation are the survivors who needed that law to work properly. Every time a high-profile case weaponizes a statute meant to protect vulnerable people, it makes it harder for the next person who actually needs it. That's the real cost of what Blake Lively has done here. Not just to her own reputation, not just to Justin Baldoni, but to the framework that Victoria Burke spent real time and real effort building for people who don't have Blake's resources or Blake's platform or Blake's legal team. And at some point, the story stops being about Justin Baldoni at all, and it just becomes about Blake Lively refusing to accept that she didn't win. That's where we are now.